Blessings, good evening. Today is Tuesday, so that means we have some questions have come in, which we'll endeavour to answer. So the first question: how do we discover our inner fears and overcome the fears? Well, I think you've answered it. We have to discover them. We have to find them, which is not always straightforward, is it? Because fear is a conditioned phenomena. It's a sankhara, a certain way of reacting to experience, very linked, closely linked to aversion, or it's a form of aversion. You're afraid of something that might happen that you don't want. There's some threat, some risk. It can be very subtle, just a mental thing. You're afraid that you'll make a mistake, afraid what somebody else will think of you. Or it could be something very powerful or very strong, like the fear of death. When you get the news you might have a life-threatening disease, or the fear of death that may happen when you're involved in a serious accident, or if there was a threat, say, from a wild animal or something like that. So you have various degrees of fear, from minor fears up to very deeply ingrained fear. So they're not the more deeply ingrained fears are not always going to be triggered, are they? You walk down the street, go about your business. Most of the time, you're not fearing for your life, unless you're unfortunate living in a war zone or something. But life is uncertain. You never quite know what's around the corner, and sometimes things do suddenly come up. Like pandemics suddenly emerge. Suddenly everyone's panicking because COVID is on the horizon. Or earthquakes happen, or storms. Or your personal situation can change. When your health changes, you may have suddenly you become ill, or you suddenly face some threat. So fear can be triggered very quickly. When we practice the Dhamma, that's one thing you become more and more mindful of and aware of, is the uncertainty of life. And that helps you to deal with fears. Because if you're reflecting on uncertainty of your body, because you know it's, the more you practice, the more you become aware that the body is changing, aging, can be affected by disease and so on. The more you become aware of that, then or the more you know that the body is subject to these changes, the more that helps you to deal with fearful or uncertain situations that arise. Because you've already been considering that fact. If you're considering that every day that things are changing, things are impermanent, when that impermanence displays itself maybe in a more extreme way, or a more manifests in a more obvious way, if you've already been contemplating change and impermanence, then you're ready. So that includes fear. So say, my own personal example, maybe when the first time I stayed in a forest, which had wild animals in it, say like bears, tigers, elephants and things, I couldn't sleep a wink the whole night because the fear was very strong. Never been in that situation before, and I could hear animals growling and moving around. So fear kept me awake. Fear comes and then you get physical reactions, you get adrenaline and tension, which keeps you awake. And then you get mental proliferation based on your projection. You hear a sound or it's dark and you're not sure what's there. So your mind fills in the blanks and creates things to be afraid of. Either remembers things, past things, or creates new things. So I couldn't sleep the whole night, and I can remember that. But then staying in the forest regularly over the years, now I can easily sleep at night, maybe sleep too much. Even if there's a wild animal around, you can still fall asleep if you're used to it and you've reflected on impermanence and fear and attachment. Where does fear come from? It comes from attachment. So the less you attach, the less you identify with the body, with feelings, with thoughts and emotions as self, the less fear you'll have. So this is what we're finding out as we meditate. You don't know what fears you have, you don't know what they all are yet, maybe. But you're developing a method by which you can face and learn from fear and overcome it, let it go, by cutting off the root causes, which are attachment. So say you practice mindfulness of breathing regularly, you might become more skilled at following the breath, and that's one way you can use to let go of fear, because if you're in a situation where you're nervous, fearful, anxious, you turn to the breath and quickly or slowly, depending on how well you're doing it and what the situation is, you may be able to completely let go of your fear in that situation by calming your mind, going to the breath, which calms both body and mind, and overcome that fear by just using the breath meditation. You also, as you practice meditation, you gain a lot of other qualities. You tend to gain more kindness and compassion, more patience, and more insight. All of this is helping you to identify fear as a kilesa, a source of suffering, but also giving you the mental qualities which help to quieten your fears, see fear for what it is, see through it, maybe go out the other side where you realize fear was just a mental state that you brought up, you attached to for a while, but then you let go of it. And if you can let go of small fears, then you can maybe later on let go of bigger fears. Like, for example, Ajahn Kalyano would know that many of his monks didn't like to give public talks when they were junior. They don't like public speaking, sitting up on the high seat, because in Thailand you sit on a high seat, explaining the Dhamma. Many monks didn't want to do that, didn't like it, so he might make them do it occasionally, not all the time. So he would say, your turn to give a talk. That would bring, for some monks, bring up a lot of fear, nervousness. But it's a fairly safe fear, in the sense there's no real danger other than your own mind creating fear. So if a monk's been through that, they realise, well, maybe it wasn't as bad as they thought, or they start letting go of that kind of fear, then maybe later they can go on to deal with something much more deeply ingrained, like the fear of wild animals, fear of death from disease, or fear of ghosts. So you might later on, when they're becoming more established in their practice, better mindfulness, better understanding of how to contemplate attachment, let it go, then he might send them off to a cemetery, charnel ground, where there are corpses or people are being regularly cremated, and to deal with the fear of ghosts. Sometimes even the Western monks who often assume they don't have a fear of ghosts because it's not in our culture, really. They go to those places and assuming there'll be no fear, and then they hear a bump in the night and they realise there's at least a little bit of a movement in the mind. Maybe an Asian monk might have full-on fear paralysis, and they got tension and sweating and really struggling with their state of mind because they have a strong, deeply ingrained fear of ghosts. A Western monk might not have that extreme reaction, but they still might have a little bit of doubt, worry. What was that? Do ghosts exist? Can ghosts really hurt you? It may be not extreme, but it's still there in a more milder form. So partly fears are your own karma, aren't they? What you've built up, what attachments you've built up, what experiences you've had in the past which you've identified with and maybe trigger fear over and over again. So most people are afraid of poisonous snakes, for example, whether they're Western or Asian, whoever. Most people are wary of a snake that if you know it can bite you and maybe kill you, you're careful. And if you suddenly come across a snake, fear will arise. So you have to contemplate it. Fear, the physical reaction, the gut reaction, the fast heartbeat, the sweating, all those kind of reactions, and then the mental state, which may be just simply get out of here when you meet the snake. But then some people are very good and confident with snakes. They learn how to pick them up, they learn how to deal with them. So I know monks who can pick up the cobra and seemingly have no fear of it, and just pick it up, show the cobra who's boss. So fear, depends on you, your attachments, your karma, what you've got. And see, that's how you've asked, how do you discover? Well, over time you'll become more aware and you'll know where your fears are, or you find out where they are. And then you start contemplating them. Go beyond them, see them as impermanent. It's not self, it's a conditioned thing. Fear comes through, you might say, wrong thinking, comes through attachment, and you're looking at the root of it so that you can let that go and know it for what it is. Oh, it's this attachment. You know where it's come from, you know why it comes up when it's triggered, but then you also know it's just impermanent, not self. It's a mental state, which may also have physical manifestation. If you're mindful enough and insightful enough, you can let it go. You keep letting go. If you keep completely let go of fear, then you're probably what we call an anagami, a non-returner. You let go of attachment to the body. But that's a very advanced stage of practice. Next question. What is the best approach of practicing the Dhamma? Should one approach by letting go all, or should one still keep their own pleasures in the practice? Well, pleasure and pain are experiences we all have as human beings, because this human body is sensitive. We have 6 senses, the 5 physical senses and the 1 mind. This realm is a sensitive realm. It's called the Gama Loka, the sensual realm. And senses bring us both pleasure and pain, and sometimes just neutral feeling as well. We tend to get this alternating pleasure and pain, sometimes more pleasure, more pain. And these are the basis for craving and attachment. And you might say this is the crux of the practice. The center of the practice is becoming more aware, more mindful, and investigating and contemplating the craving and attachment arises based on feeling, which arises based on sense contact. So you're learning what is the nature of pleasure, which is it's impermanent. what's the danger of it? It's addictive. We like pleasure, so we keep seeking it. All kinds of different pleasures in life, some subtle, some coarse. It's addictive, we want more of it. Even pleasure can stimulate fear, can't it? The fear of losing it, fear of not keeping it, not getting it. So you contemplate the dangers and drawbacks and the nature of pleasure, and then similarly pain. The more we attach to pleasure, to pain, the more we suffer. So even pleasure and attaching to pleasure causes a suffering. So that's where you see the drawbacks, the dangers, and you look for the escape. The escape is to develop more mindfulness and then insight into the three characteristics: impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, not self. So your mind becomes more detached towards pleasure. You may still experience pleasure because you have a body, so you can experience the pleasure of eating food when you're hungry, or good tasting food that agrees with you. When your legs are tired, you sit down, or when you've been sitting too long, you sit up. Or the pleasure of conversation, or seeing a beautiful sight, and so on. Just having senses means you will experience pleasure. Even if you try to minimize it and cut it off, there'll be some pleasure in your life. But you're contemplating it from this, developing this detached awareness that knows pleasure as impermanent, as not self. That helps you to manage it as well. With sense restraint, mindfulness, reflection, you can manage your pleasures so you don't become too addicted to them, or you let go of the addiction. So, for example, you might eat food, and the more you practice mindfulness and investigate the nature of food and the three characteristics in food, the pleasure will change, won't it? Before you just ate for enjoyment, and you try this, try that, and you indulge, and it means more to you perhaps. As you practice more mindfulness, it's a little bit less enjoyable, in the sense you still get pleasure when you taste, but you don't crave it so much. You just know, oh, well, food is like this, tastes like this. You eat and you reflect on how much you need to eat, what's healthy food and the right amount. You don't create so much in your mind over it, having practiced mindfulness and continuing to practice mindfulness. And there's less anticipation, fantasy, imagination around the whole thing. It's more just knowing, oh, this is food, it's like this. So your attitude towards pleasure changes, but there'll still be some pleasure in your life, and you shouldn't expect to cut off all pleasurable feeling. But you learn to manage it, you learn the right amount, and you learn what pleasures are dangerous and addictive and feed a lot of attachment and suffering. So your relationship to pleasure and pain changes a bit through practice. And they say, sometimes you, like arahants in the time of the Buddha, would comment on how beautiful nature was, because when the mind is peaceful and letting go of attachment, it sees the beauty in nature, the peace, the tranquility of the forest or the wilderness, beautiful sky, sunset, beautiful river or lake or something. Even somebody who's beyond attachment can appreciate the beauty in the world, the natural beauty of the world, but there's no craving. So it's not annihilationism or rejection of beauty. What the Buddha was talking is understanding, but also seeing the danger in attachment. Of course, the deeper pleasure of samadhi is another one that you'll have to contemplate as you meditate. The whole nature of samadhi, it's a letting go of external sense pleasures and sense objects, pleasure and pain. So it's coming to an inner peace, which is combined most of the time with piti and sukha, so rapture, joy, contentment. deeper kind of pleasure that's not based on external objects. It's coming from the mind itself. But that can also be a basis for attachment. But it doesn't mean to say you shouldn't experience it or practice. It just means contemplate it as impermanent and not self in the same way as external pleasures. More questions? Luang Por, how do I deal with the rudeness? The Buddha already told us to be ready for it, didn't he? He told us about the 8 worldly winds which blow us every day. Pleasure and pain, as we've just been talking about. Gain and loss, so like earning money, spending money. Status, power, honour, and the decline of that. And then praise and blame, or politeness and rudeness would be one aspect of praise and blame. The speech and the behaviour of others towards us, sometimes they're kind and respectful, sometimes they're rude and disrespectful. We get that every day, more or less, and the Buddha already said, be ready for it, because it's just normal. The important thing is keep your mind in a normal state as you meet these things. Some people are rude to us, some people are very kind and helpful to us, some people are more kind of neutral to us. One person can be rude to you one day and then kind to you the next. Maybe they'll apologize, maybe they didn't realize they're being rude. It's another reflection, is it? Is the rudeness in your perception only, or is it genuinely rude or abrasive, unkind behaviour? Because sometimes we get it wrong, we read it wrong in some situations. There's a few things to consider, aren't they? But it's just part of life, dealing with this. Another reflection we can bring up is maybe I've been rude to people in the past and now the karma is coming back, because sometimes it's like that, isn't it? Maybe it's something that you can remember. You've been rude to that person before, now it's revenge time. Or maybe it's something you can't remember. Maybe just be from so long ago you don't know what the causes are, but the more you contemplate karma, you realise there's probably something that's led up to this, and now I'm just receiving some of my old karma here. So we try to practice mindfulness, patience, keep our mind in a good state, even though we may be receiving the unkind or rude words of another person or rude behaviour. That's our number one priority. Keep our own mind in a skillful, wholesome, good state, even if there's provocation or unjustified rudeness or whatever it is. We come back to ourselves and practice. Another reflection is you reflect, do I do this? Could I do this? If they're rude to us, could I be that rude to someone? Maybe you still have the roots of rudeness in yourself, so then rather than getting upset and angry with the other person, come back to yourself and think, I've got to work more on mine. And maybe you use the situation where that person has been rude to you as motivation and to energize you to be more aware of your own speech and let go of the intention to be rude yourself. Maybe it's triggered by their rudeness, you want revenge, you're looking for a way to get back. That's where you have to be strong and say, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to give up my own intention to be rude back or argue or whatever. So, it's a simple question, but actually it can be quite a profound practice, dealing with these kind of uncertainties in life. We like praise, so we attach to that. We don't like people who are rude or disrespectful, we attach to that. But the attachment leads to a different reaction maybe, but it's still an attachment. Our number one aim is maintain the mindfulness and reflect and learn from the situation. If you spend time with monks, well-practiced monks, that helps. I've seen so many well-practiced monks deal well with people who are being rude, disrespectful, aggressive. You're meeting rudeness with non-rudeness, meeting aggression with non-aggression. And when you see it, it's very inspiring, because you know that person is the one who's displaying the non-aggression is doing a good job, and it's the result of their training. And it's inspiring to see that people can keep their cool, keep restrained when other people are being rude, aggressive. I remember once I was on a underground train and a man got on. This was in London. I was with Luang Por Anand and 5 monks. We were sitting there on the train, and a man got on and started abusing us, shouting at us. Everyone just sat there, cool, calm, silent, mindful, until the police took the guy away. We didn't have to do anything. It just all unfolded and ended by itself. We just carried on sitting there, mindfully restrained. Next question. Dear Ajahn, I have a question and I hope it gets to you. Well, it's got to me. When I have the intention of breaking my precepts, I have this fear and shame in my mind. This made me afraid of who I am. Can you please explain who is this, who is afraid? Is it my mind or my heart or emotions? Thank you. That's an interesting question, isn't it? Because we've been talking a bit about fear, and there's many kinds of fear, and you might, sometimes they call this the skillful fear or the wise fear. The technical word is hiri and otapa, shame and fear of wrongdoing. And these are wholesome, skillful dhammas, skillful qualities of mind, because the Buddha called them the guardians of the world. It's like your own inner guardian voice or guardian angel that's saying, don't do it, you'll regret it, it will cause someone suffering or you suffering or both, so don't do it, don't say it. As Ajahn Chah used to say, even if you're on your own and no one's around, still don't do it, don't say it. And that's partly the fear of the consequences of your actions, isn't it? So it's considered a good quality of mind. In the highest level, it's just a quality of mind. It's a cetasika, it's a mental factor that arises through training, through understanding the truth, the Dhamma, the law of karma, through wise reflection and mindfulness. Hiri-otapa, shame and fear of wrongdoing, arises to protect you in a situation like you say, when you're tempted to break your precept. It's that voice that comes up and stops you killing the mosquito, stealing somebody else's wallet or something, running after somebody else's partner, telling a lie, having a drink. It's the voice that says, no, don't do this. So when you say, who does that? Well, on the normal, conventional sense, there's you're making that choice, I'm not going to do this. On the higher sense, it's these qualities at work in your mind. So mindfulness plays a key role, doesn't it? It's knowing the situation, and then this word clear comprehension or clear awareness, sampajanya, so sati sampajanya, come up, and you don't do it, or you don't say it. Even though part of you wants to, the other part says, no, don't do this. So it's a battle, isn't it? And I've seen people battle. I've battled myself sometimes. The mosquito is there sucking your blood, and the hand comes up, but then another voice says, no, don't do it. Don't kill the mosquito. Maybe you change and you just do that, or blow it away, or just let it have free blood for a while, give it a free meal. Or something more serious than that, you want to shout at someone or say something in anger towards somebody else because you're very annoyed in that situation, but you don't. You have the thought to, but there's a voice that says, don't do that. You could call that wise fear. So it's not just sort of foolish or just afraid someone else is going to do something. I mean, that may come up, but when we're talking about wise fear, we're saying this is going to lead to suffering, therefore don't do it. And there's enough awareness in that moment, and it may be a very split-second thing. You stop, you don't say it, you don't do it. So maybe you're in an argument, you've already been in an argument, and you realize this is just going to make things worse, going to make them more upset, more angry, you're going to get more angry, everyone is going to suffer, other people may be affected, so you stop. You say, no, I'm not going to say this, I'm not going to carry on arguing. So you walk away, and you say, I'll talk about this later. That's wise fear of the consequences of speaking more in anger or saying something that's not true or not good, not skillful. So many situations. So these are skillful qualities that come up to protect you from making worse karma that will lead to your harm and the harm of others. And that allows other skillful qualities to come up. Like, if you restrain yourself, then maybe goodwill can arise to fill the mind that previously had anger, or calm can arise that when you were previously anxious or afraid. The wise fear that stops you saying or doing something also allows other good qualities to come into your mind. So all these different skillful qualities in the path of practice support each other. Good afternoon, Ajahn. Is it true that no matter what, one should try to get ordained even just for 1 or 3 months, because the power of going forth is so strong and it's the most wholesome act amongst all actions? Well, generally speaking, that is a good aspiration. It's rooted in this what we call nekama sankappa, the skillful intention of renunciation and letting go. Whether it's taking on the 8 precepts, because that's also a form of ordination, whether you become an anagarika or 8 precept holder in a monastery, or you just go on a meditation retreat perhaps, or actually going forth as a novice or a fully ordained Buddhist monk. These are acts of renunciation, or Buddhist nun. And it's making that commitment to train and a higher level of discipline than you, say, as a layperson, where you may determine to keep 5 precepts. So it's bringing up all kinds of skillful qualities by making that commitment. So even if it is only for a temporary period of a month or 3 months, as you say, that's a really good thing, generally speaking, if you're ready for it. You also have to assess your readiness for it, whether you're doing it out of pure idealism and really you're not willing to give up things, because you don't want to do it badly. You don't want to become a monk and then break all the rules. You have to be willing to train, to give up, to use the discipline to train yourself, to go without certain things, evening meal, to be celibate, etc. There's a lot of things you are giving up, so you have to be ready for it. But if you are ready for it and you do it, it generally draws out many good qualities, which will, in the short term or sometimes the long term, supports your deepening of your meditation, both the development of samadhi and insight. But in the short term, you may not see quick results. Some people do, but not everyone. Sometimes it's quite a challenge to suddenly withdraw from the world, give up everything, and then that's reflected when you meditate. You're full of doubts and worries and sleepiness and everything. And then sometimes people misunderstand. They say, oh, I've ordained as a monk and I'm not peaceful. I thought I was going to be, entering jhana every day. It takes time, and sometimes the good karma of ordination takes a little bit of time to mature and come through. But from my observation, it will come through in many ways, some that you can predict and might be aware of, and some maybe surprise you as well. It's not the only way to practice, and if you are in a situation where you can't ordain, then you practice at home 5 precepts, and some lay people keeping the 5 precepts are very disciplined and live a very good life, and they attain samadhi and insight too. So it's not an ultimate obstacle, you can still practice. And as I said, some people ordain and they're very disappointed with it all because their mind takes a while to settle down, and they struggle with the renunciation and the lifestyle and the simplicity, etc. You can't always predict ahead of time how it will go, but generally speaking, it's really good to do, and it will boost your practice, but you have to keep practicing. And whether you're a lay person or a monk or a nun, the challenge is to keep the practice going and be patient and kind to yourself, kind to others, and keep developing mindfulness and keep reflecting on the Dhamma. And it's a commitment, it's a practice that takes time, takes effort. You just have to accept that. But if you do get the chance to ordain, yes, very good. Another question. Dear Ajahn Kalyano, how do we separate the feeling of apathy from anicca? Sometimes when I know things are impermanent and not self, I feel a bit apathetic about life. How do we balance that? Maybe you have to ask yourself, how is your apathy manifesting? You say you see impermanence and not self, and then you experience apathy. How is it manifesting? Does that mean you can't get out of bed in the morning? You can't be bothered to meditate, you can't be bothered to do anything good, listen to the Dhamma, can't be bothered helping people. Okay, so if that's your apathy, maybe you have to apply the very same reflection that you're saying led to it. Your apathy is impermanent and not self too. So if you're lying there saying, I can't be bothered getting up to meditate, you have to say, oh, this is impermanent and not self too. I can let go of it. Just as the reflection on impermanence you previously had that led you to feel apathetic was impermanent, and now your apathy you have to take as the object of your vipassana, your investigation is, apathy is just another feeling, isn't it? It arises, passes away. I don't have to attach to it, identify with it, I don't have to follow it. Therefore I have to get up and do my meditation. It's always kind of selective apathy, isn't it? It's like, all my pleasures I now see they're impermanent. Things I used to enjoy now I've given up because they're impermanent. So then we sort of wilt like a flower that's lost all its moisture. You sort of wilt and go to apathy. But that's really just because you've lost some of your pleasures and your attachments. Now you have to develop the inner pleasure of Dhamma, which is also pleasurable, but it's like an acquired taste, isn't it? You have to work at it. The peaceful mind that comes from practicing mindfulness, meditation, the joy of helping people, giving, sharing, the joy of reflecting on Dhamma, seeing the truth, knowing the truth. These kind of inner joys take a little bit of nurturing and development, so you have to be patient with that. So it's a transition, isn't it? And I think what you're experiencing is a very typical and normal transition. You've seen through some of the superficial, temporary pleasures that humankind gets involved with and caught up in. but you haven't yet developed the peace of letting go and the happiness of letting go. So there's this transition stage where you have to be very patient as you're seeing the truth about impermanence in sense objects and the sensory experience of the world, but the Dhamma is not yet fully established in your mind. So sometimes you have aversion, fed up, it's all meaningless. We all have been through that. You just have this kind of a gloomy view of everything. Oh, it's all meaningless, what's the point? Everything's impermanent, everything's not self. When you die, you don't take anything with you. And it's not insight, it's aversion. It's aversion to, it's kind of being like you feel cheated. You feel cheated. Before you were happy in your blissful ignorance, attached to the world and the pleasures of the world and getting a job, making money and having relationships and friends and all the things that we do. Then you're seeing through it maybe and saying, oh, this is still not ultimate happiness. So you feel a bit like you've been cheated in this body, you've been looking after it, and it's getting older and it gets sick and gives you aches and pains and it can't give you constant pleasure like you would like. And you can't find any pleasure in the world, and of course the mind gets irritated by that. So you have to turn to the Dhamma and stick with it until the Dhamma fills your mind up. The Sila, Samadhi, Panya, the peace, the insight fills your mind up, and then it doesn't matter that the pleasures of the world are temporary and only so good. That doesn't matter. That's a natural letting go will take place. But until that happens, you have to be very patient and keep practicing. Don't give up. As one famous arahant in Thailand said, the world is really basically just shit. Because it's impermanent, it's just, everything goes to mulch, if you want to use a more polite word. It just goes to mulch, doesn't it? You build something, eventually it crumbles, whether through aging or an earthquake or whatever, or a war. You plant a tree, eventually it falls over, it dies, becomes mulch. People become mulch. You bury bodies or you cremate them, they become either ash or mulch. Everything just goes to mulch. That's the nature of the world. When you see that, at first it's kind of tiring and disappointing, isn't it? Because previously you were enthralled and fascinated with it, and now you're seeing through it. So there's that letting go, and often that brings a bit of disappointment. But then you see the truth, and the truth is much more liberating, satisfying, brings you deeper sense of contentment. So it's better. You have to keep practicing and to bring the mind to the Dhamma, and then it doesn't matter if the world is just mulch. Another question. It's true for humans to liberate themselves from suffering by cultivating the Noble Eightfold Path. What about for those in lower realms, like birds, animals, insects and other entities? How can they liberate themselves? Do they have to go through eons before they can even get to be born as a human? Well, we hope not. We wish all beings to be born as a human and hear the Dhamma so that they can become liberated. But of course some beings may take a long time because everyone has different karma. And animals generally have to struggle with a lot of dullness. They don't understand things like we do. Their intelligence there's something there, but it's not the same as a human. We have to accept that. So animals are struggling to understand the Dhamma. They know basic things like eating and procreating and sleeping and fear of danger. They can help humans, and maybe that's one of their pathways out of the animal realm, is staying close to humans, being helpful, making good karma, rescuing people, supporting people, working with people. But sometimes it goes the other way. Animals close to people often end up in the cooking pot or being abused or exploited as well. So it's not always that great, but occasionally you hear the stories of the animal with a bit of merit who's close to being born as a human, and maybe they do something good that may result in human birth. So, story we often quote, one of the elephant who helped Lumpur Supar out of the forest, a monk who was lost in the forest, starving, facing his death. Herd of elephants came, and he was meditating, he made an adhitthana, a wish, if there's any way out of this forest so I can carry on practicing for Nibbana, may something come along to help me. And this herd of elephants came, and they were a bit aggressive at first, as elephants in the wild are, surrounded him, threatening him. But one elephant, you might say the good elephant, came up and stood between the monk and all the herd of elephants, and then started pushing the others away. So they went further away from the monk, left him alone. And the good elephant stayed with him. Out of compassion, out of good karma. Maybe there was a deva controlling the elephant or helping the elephant. All these things are possible. And the elephant started walking. And Lumpur Supar thought, this is my chance, and followed the elephant. So the elephant left its herd and started walking for many hours through the forest, taking the monk, who was starving, and there was no villagers around, no people around, walked for many hours until it got to a clearing, and there were signs of human habitation, like fields and houses. Lumpur Supar knew, this is a way out now from the forest, and the elephant wouldn't follow him further because elephants would possibly be hunted by humans, so it knew the danger. So it'd done its job, led him to the edge of the forest, stopped, and was preparing to go back. So Lumpur put his hand up and said, wait, and he gave it a blessing. This good karma you've made, helping me out of the forest, showing me the way out, may it be a cause for you to progress in your Dhamma practice and attain human rebirth. And they separated, went their separate ways. Lumpur obviously survived, the elephant went off. We don't know what happened to the elephant after that, but many, many years later, Lumpur was in his monastery in Phuket, and a young man came to the monastery one day and said, I want to ordain as a monk, can you ordain me? Which is quite a normal thing to happen in Buddhist monasteries. And Lumpur agreed to ordain the man, and later in private he told the monks, this is the elephant, it's been reborn as a human, and now this person has come forward to request ordination as a monk. So it's like success, from helping a monk to actually being born as human, to having faith in Buddhism, to actually requesting ordination. It can happen, but probably not very often. Unfortunately, animals, they're very trapped in their realm, and they're probably destined for hundreds and hundreds of lifetimes in that realm until the karma of being born as an animal wears off, and maybe, just maybe, they might become a human. But you can wish for that for them, wish them to gain a human birth. Last question tonight. When we share merit in the monastery, should we include the devas? Yeah, why not? We often have a catch-all phrase, we say, may all sentient beings share in this merit. That could be when you're chanting, or meditating, or making an offering. You make this resolution, determination of mind, it's called adhitthana, and you share the blessings, the merit of your good action, whatever it may be, with all beings. So that's not only your family, friends, your departed relatives, but all beings in all realms. So higher realms, devas, brahmas, lower realms, animals, ghosts, and so on. There's no limit to your dedicating merit or spreading metta. Spreading metta is to the living. We spread metta in all directions to all beings, and that can include devas. You might have the doubt, you think, oh, well, devas are already reborn in a good realm, good rebirth. Why do they need merit or metta? Well, maybe they don't, but it's a nice thing to do. It's like, you meet your friend and they're fine, they're healthy, happy, life is going well for them, but you still wish them well. So we can still wish the devas well, we can dedicate merit to the devas, and we can think kind thoughts to them. Maybe you do that, maybe the devas will take a special interest in you. Oh, this guy is always sitting there spreading metta to the devas. We like this guy, we're going to help this guy. Maybe devas think like that, because devas tend to be very kind, compassionate beings. Maybe they like to help people who are doing good. So this person is always kind enough to think of the devas as, oh, such a kind lay person, always thinking of the devas. We want to help this person in whatever way they can. Maybe they just send their thoughts back to you. So it's win-win. You share merit with the devas share merit back to you. Everybody's happy. So why not keep sharing merit with those in lower realms, higher realms, human realms, everyone. Keep going. So we'll finish on that happy note tonight.